much. I'm very, very much excited to be here. This is my first OASPA conference, but already I've seen familiar faces from the various conferences where these very, very important conversations have been had. And I think it's very critical to knit the conversations together between the various conferences. And indeed, the issue of policy is a critical one. The session today will be looking at policy development, issues around approaches to developing policy, issues around the processes, implementation imperatives, and most importantly, the experiences that the various case studies that have been invited here will provide as a context. And particularly very, very relevant is the obstacles in the label of the conference session, the obstacles to policy development. Colleagues, the time is very limited, and I think this session in the next conferences will probably require a bit of more time, but we have about 75 minutes. We propose to have 50-minute presentations by the 5 different speakers, 10 minutes each, to provide their interventions in the form of a presentation or talking off the hip. And then we'll allow 15 minutes of discussions at the end so that we can indulge the audience in their questions. Colleagues, the outcome that we anticipate from these discussions is really to have a treasure trove of best experiences, best practices that we can then maybe share within some forum so that over time this can evolve to be a resource that we can all learn from. We do have a distinguished set of panelists. Their names are on the program. I will indulge and allow each one of them to introduce themselves during maybe the first minute of their interventions. But very quickly, we are delighted to have Professor Jean-Claude Burgelman, who is from the Free University of Brussels. He's had a lot of experience in the European circles regarding policy. We also have Joy Owango from Kenya. She's running the training center in communications and doing a lot of dialogue around open science and policy development in the continent. So she will provide very, very good viewpoints from the African continent. We also have UNESCO represented through Persic, who's also doing a lot of work, especially with the UNESCO Open Science Recommendations toolkit, which has a dimensions of policy in there. We also have Shinichi Akaike, who is the Secretariat of Science and Technology Innovation Policy Cabinet Office from Japan. We offer very detailed views from Japan and Asia. We also have Nurzatil Jalaluddin from Malaysian Open Science Alliance. They do fantastic work in Malaysia with the Malaysian Open Science Platform. So colleagues, those who are our panelists, we've offered some discussion points to the panelists. Indeed, these are just indicative. Some of the points they can come up during their discussion with those. Particularly, we are looking at one, the open science policy drivers. What are the key motivating factors for governments and institutions and or funders in developing OS policies? What are the various different policy development frameworks? What should go into these policies, really? The methodologies, various methodologies for developing policies. These will be important to hear about in terms of experiences from different case studies. And again, also the issues of implementation. I think implementation is critical, as you can imagine. So regarding policy implementations, what are the key practical considerations, roadmaps, insights, challenges regarding implementation of these policies for various areas of the world? The issue of policy revision is also critical. Indeed, monitoring evaluation is critical. Evidence-based policy review is critical. If there's any experiences and insights from those, we're very keen to hear about. And finally, colleagues, obstacles in policy development. What are the real impediments that we encounter when we do these things? I would strongly encourage delegates for the conference to post on the chat any questions in the Q&A, also on the chat, any experiences they themselves may have to stimulate this very, very fruitful discussion. Colleagues, without further ado, Can I take this moment to invite Jean-Claude to start with this intervention? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tshiamo, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the colleagues for giving me the honor to be present amongst this distinguished panel. So the topic of the panel, Tshiamo, and the way you introduce it, of course, we could spend a whole conference on it. It is indeed a very vast topic. I think it covers very well the knowledge we should have in order to make a right diagnosis of where we are today. And I will pick up a few topics so that I do not exceed my 10 minutes, but I could talk half a day on the topic, by the way. So I think first of all that the progress towards open science, although we made remarkable progress in the last 10-15 years, because let's admit it, the real discussion only started 10-15 years ago. Well, although we made a lot of progress, although it is a global discussion, although it is a global movement, I still think it is not going fast enough. Why? Because there is an enormous need for it. There is an enormous need for a societal point of view. And we have to address quite significant challenges as a planet. And we know that by sharing knowledge and by making the results of the research system reproducible, reusable, we will find quicker solutions for sustainable development goals, for the climate crisis, for poverty, for what have you. Under the COVID, the search for vaccines has been speeded up by the fact that the data and the articles were made available much quicker or in real time than they used to do so. So we know it works and we need more of it. So we are good, but we are not good enough in terms of way forward. Why not? I think, and that goes back to the first point, what is the driver for open science? I think that we make ourselves life difficult by making the agenda too broad. And I can say this, I mean, I have no longer a responsibility as a civil servant, so I can say it as an academic. Initially, the discussion in Europe, the way we launched it, the way we found traction for it, the way we could convince policymakers is by hammering on actually one key element, opening up the results of publicly funded research, which is in the billions in Europe on a yearly basis, opening up that research for reusability and for other people to do whatever they want to do with it, is maximizing the investment of public funding. That is the key argument that makes the difference in moving the policymakers politically, but also in the science policy world, addressing the issue of open science. It is simply a better return on investment for all the billions on a global scale, trillions we put in science. And that is, in my view, still the core driver for open science, together with the need for finding faster solutions for the problems we face. If we make it too broad, if we start discussing about what are optimal routes, what is a transparent research assessment system and so on, how can we facilitate the combating fraud, all valid points. But if we hook all that in one big basket, I think we are not going fast enough, because we lose track of what really matters, which is the availability of the products of public funding of science, which are the data on the one hand, data experiments, and the articles on the other hand. So that is the one first topic. One first point I wanted to make. Let's go back to basics. Let's focus on that. Why? Also because it's gigantic. The future of science will be data-driven. Already now, articles are written by machines. By using artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, it will only increase, and we will get even more articles, even more data than ever, to the factor X. So if we ensure that this part of the scientific system is open, is reproducible, is fair, then at least the fundamentals of the future are guaranteed to be in a way accessible to the whole population, to the whole world of the scientists. So we need to stick to our core business, I would say there, because the core business is only increasing due to the evolution of data-driven science. And I think then to to come to the second point, which I wanted to pick out of the list that you gave us, Tshiamo, I think that the reason why we are not going fast enough, to my opinion, is not only to do with the fact that we make it ourselves too broadly speaking difficult, but also because we largely rely on a self-regulatory approach to moving forward. If you look at it, nowhere in the world, as far as I know, are there mandatory actions to be decreed to move towards open science. There are, of course, funders requesting mandatory action, making the data mandatory openly available. There are like for example, the European Commission, there are funders requesting open access, but it is still marginal. It's not global. And as long as it is marginal, it explains why 60% of the world production of science is still behind paywalls. Because if it is only on a voluntary and on a self-regulatory basis, well, then it happens what it will happen. It will be voluntary and self-regulatory. And we all know that no one voluntarily gives up something which is very profitable. And that, bearing in mind that, in my view, the battle of the future of open science will be open data, will even become more complicated. How are we going to get a grip on this explosion of data, plus of the business models to make data open, if we rely on self-regulatory action and voluntary approaches? I doubt that it will help. So we need carrots to move forward, but we also need sticks, and that you don't have in a regulatory approach. And then finally, what I'm really concerned about, and it's also part of the key bottlenecks. So one of the key bottlenecks is the self-regulatory action, and it goes in pair with the fact that increasingly the world of science production is governed by an oligopoly, if you translate it in economic terms, meaning a small amount of players control an enormous part of the market, be it articles, be it data. And that, of course, as we know from the economic literature in every aspect of society that we analyze, is a situation which tends to only reinforce itself. If I'm part of the oligopolistic power, there's no reason for me to give it up, because it is a fantastic way of making sure that I have a return on investment as a company. So all in all, we should really concentrate on the core, which is data and articles. We should try to find ways to get away from self-regulatory action and finding ways to make it more mandatory. That means, for example, that universities should step up and make it much more explicit in their policies. And we should absolutely put in our focus the explosion of data science and what it will mean for the whole debate on the free accessibility of the products of publicly funded science. In a nutshell, that work is what I tried to say within the 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Jean-Claude, for that very short 10 minutes. I think you covered a lot of ground, and there will be an opportunity, I think, in the Q&A to engage and indulge in some of the very important points you are mentioning. I think the theme of the conference indeed does also cover this. I think I picked up a few important things, especially the value proposition of open science and the need to obviously articulate this, including to policymakers, in the form of return on investment and the trajectory you see regarding a focus on opening up data and the business models around it. And indeed, the very, very important decisions to be made regarding how do we open this up to the many instead of the few, including through mandatory actions. I think these are very important conversations that need to have traction as we go forward. I think for this first round, let's then invite Joy Owango to provide African perspectives through the work that TCC Africa is doing in the continent in related areas. Joy, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for making time to listen to come to this session. So what I'm going to take you through is the activities we've been conducting, the open science activities we've been conducting through the strategic partnerships in Africa. And most of these have actually helped in creating open science dialogues. So I'm the executive director of the Training Center in Communication. That's a research capacity trust based and housed in the University of Nairobi. We've been in existence for the last 17 years, and what we do is we support researchers, institutes, and governments in improving their research output and increasing their visibility through scholarly communication. So this is the agenda of my presentation. I'll take you through it. I've picked out the aspects of what Dr. Tshiamo was talking about to just show a practical case studies of the activities we are doing. So I'll take you through the open science drivers, the methodology we are using to push these drivers, and also some of the case studies that we have that are regional, national, and also institutional, the barriers and challenges we've faced, and the practical implementation considerations that have been proposed. Please note, these activities we started very actively in July, in July last year. No, in February last year, before we expanded to what we are doing right now. Okay, so I was keenly listening to the previous speaker, and I understand where where the open science drivers are coming from, especially from his perspective, and also most importantly, from what is happening from the global north. But in Eastern and Western Africa, these are the regions we are actually working on. The interesting open science policy drivers are being pushed by the regional political, not political bodies, the regional bodies, the regional institutional bodies, in this case, the East African Science and Technology Commission and the Economic Organization of the West African States. Now, these are both, one is a regional parliament that is with East Africa, and one is a community parliament that is in West Africa. In East Africa, we have 7, in the East African community, we have 7 countries, and in the ECOWAS region, we have 15 countries. And the open science initiatives have been actively pushed by these 2 organizations, namely because these 2 organizations, ECOWAS and also the East African Science and Technology Commission, have 2 policies on STNI. So in ECOWAS, it is the ECOPOST, or the ECOWAS Policy Science and Technology Policy. And in East Africa is the East African Regional STI Policy. And these 2 commissions have aggressively pushed for the inclusion of open science within the policy. Then it is going to be, for lack of better words, nationalized or domesticated in the respective countries. The interesting thing about these 2 regions, because they have a parliament, and a regional, they all have regional parliaments, is that certain policies like STNI and trade are actually, the decisions are made at a regional level, then they are contextualized at national level. So we've been fortunate to have this the other way around. As much as we've been having conversations on policy by the various policy actors, let's not ignore them, like the library consortia, the commissions, and the various stakeholders that are within the region. But the interesting thing now is that ever since we had the UNESCO recommendation on open science, these 2 regions, these 2 commissions in these 2 parts of the world, in these 2 parts of the continent, are aggressively pushing for the adoption of open science by, first of all, including it within their STI policy. Now, what stage are we at right now? With the ECOWAS, we've just started. They've even commissioned consultants to start the process of updating the EcoPost and including open science. But in East Africa, I'm really excited to share with you that in the next couple of months, hopefully before the end of the year or first quarter of next year, we may have a regional STI policy with open science included in it, because what is left is just one step for all the 7 ministers in Eastern Africa to assent to. But for these activities to take place, we need to have strategic partnerships, and also we need to have open science dialogue. So for us, what we've been doing is that we've been taking advantage of strategic partnerships in order to have to influence these open science drivers in the region. And as I said, number one was ECOWAS. Number two is the East African Science and Technology Commission. And all these, as I said, are parliamentary, regional parliamentary commissions. And we also noted that as much as we are pushing the agenda at a policy level, there's also a need to have this there's a need to have this conversation also at an institutional policy level. So we decided we ended up partnering with the Association of African Universities, and through this partnership, we've been hosting now regional higher education institutional policy dialogues. In this case, what we want is that we want more universities in Africa adopting open science mandates. We do have more universities. We do have about 50 to 60 universities in Africa that have open access mandates. But the interesting thing, if we narrow down to East Africa, we only have one university that has an open science mandate. So there is a cause for concern, because as much as we're talking about open science, there is cautious optimism amongst leadership on actual adoption. So this is why we felt that it was important to have this conversation with higher education institution leaders, so namely vice chancellors, directors of research, directors of library sciences, directors of ICT, and also the regional policy actors. And with these regional policy actors being ECOWAS and IASTECO, who will in turn help us invite all the necessary actors who are relevant for this conversation. And these actors are multi-sectoral in nature. Okay. So the methodologies we've used, since, as I said, there's been positive response by at least the major policy actors in both regions, is creating open science dialogues. Okay, and the open science dialogue help in promoting a common understanding. As I'd mentioned, as much as we're having these conversations on open science, there's still a cautious optimism on adoption, mainly because there's a need for continuous understanding of what it entails, understanding on how to mitigate the unintended consequences, such that it is adopted. But also, most importantly, there is also a need for us to make it clear on how it can cross ST&I and higher education to a multi-sectoral level. And this is one of the reasons why ECOWAS and also IASTECO wanted to push this agenda, because they want to look at open science from a multi-sectoral perspective. So the target stakeholders we've been working with are ministries, directorates responsible for ST&I, higher education university commissions, national research councils, funders, library consortiums, and institutional leaders. So whenever we are hosting any of these national dialogues, we must have a representation from all these, so that we can have a consensus on the conversation on open science. Now, some of the case studies that we've done on the regional institutional dialogues, which we are working on in partnership with Association of African Universities, as are one in Tanzania, which we did last year, and the host university was a national university. So that is what we do. We make sure that the host universities are either national or the top private universities in that region. So in East Africa, bringing in all the leadership in higher education from Eastern Africa. And then we had in October a similar meeting in Egypt, in Cairo, and it was hosted by the British University in Egypt. And then most recently this year, we were in South Africa, where we were hosted by both University of Pretoria and the University of Cape Town, bringing in regional higher education leaders, so that by the time now we are having the conversation at, as I said, at national or regional level, everybody needs to be in a consensus also within the higher education institutional level. So the case studies that we've been hosting at national level for now, at governmental level, is, as you can see, in Tanzania, which we started, which we did in February. And tomorrow we are hosting a national dialogue in Kenya. So remember, I had said we are working with the East African Science and Technology Commission, which is pushing for the agenda in East Africa. Before the ministers sign, all the 7 ministers sign, they have mandated us to have these national dialogues in all the 7 East African countries. And as we speak for tomorrow, we have over 1,000 participants registered online, and we have over 200 registered to attend physically for this meeting. It's going to be hosted by the University of Nairobi. Now, what are the barriers and challenges we've observed as we are hosting these dialogues in preparation for the ascension of the policies? Number one is not the leadership. As I said, they are very cautiously optimistic. One is because it's not very clearly spelled out. The benefits of open science is not very clearly spelled out to them, because most of the time, by the time it comes to their desk, it is presented as open access, not the multifaceted nature of what open science entails. We have infrastructural challenges, and being in this part of the world, in Africa, so you may have access to open science infrastructure, but you may not have the adequate human capacity to sustain it or to manage it. This is something we see every single time. And also the infrastructural support systems to even manage the open science infrastructure we are proposing. Rewards and incentives is such a huge issue when it comes to open science, because it comes down to, will I get a promotion? Will I get funding? So in some countries, like in South Africa, they are way ahead on the systems, on implementing some of these systems, but it's something that you cannot see like next door in Lesotho, okay, or in Namibia. So you can see that there are some countries that are way ahead, and there's still a challenge on making clear processes on what kinds of rewards and incentive, or innovative rewards and incentives that can be proposed for those who adopt open science. And this is the reason why in all our meetings, we make sure that we have funders in them so that they can share this with us. Now, when it comes to ethical issues, we are looking at research integrity. People are still questioning on the degree to which research integrity can be upheld when you adopt open science. So that means still creating an awareness and understanding to showcase how open science can mitigate this. And of course, IP issues come up all the time. And this is the reason why also in the meetings that we've been hosting, not only do we include legal officers or IP officers, but also data protection officers. So like in the case of Kenya, we have the Data Protection Commission, which will be involved, so that everything is showcased in terms of the protection of data, but also from the patents perspective or the intellectual property rights perspective, how this their intellectual properties can be protected, as much as we are talking about to what degree we can share our information.
Let's look to wrap up, Joy.
Yes. As I wind up, some of the practical policy implementation considerations we are proposing is that whenever we're having these conversations on open science, it should be multi-sectoral. We should cross over from higher education and STI and try and target the other ministries. We need to have innovative rewards and incentive schemes, especially when we are putting this in the proposed policies. They need to be practical, innovative schemes. And we need to have also a cohesive conversation among higher education stakeholders. And we need also to adopt and develop the best and most reliable open source infrastructures and platforms, or even cost-effective platforms that partners can take advantage of or can adopt. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Joy. I think you've formatted your presentation to clearly identify the areas of intervention. I'm sure there will be a lot of discussions emanating from your talk, but most importantly, the methodology that you showed, emphasizing the dialogue that needs to be had, especially convening decision makers. I think this is critical. And of course, the necessary education that you also do in the process. I think there's also a proverb that says fish rot from the head. So clearly, your interventions are very, very critical. I will convene the Q&A at the end to go through some of the points that you raised. I think in the program, can I just then invite Anna Persic from UNESCO to also take the floor for the 10 minutes to offer perspectives from the multilateral that is UNESCO. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tshiamo, and many thanks to OASPA for inviting us and also allowing us to have this conversation around policies in the context of open access and in the context of open science. Maybe just before I start and to respond to what Jean-Claude has said, the issue of having open science now so broad and so complex is because it is a broad and a complex issue. From the moment that it became a global issue and from the moment that it became a global movement, from the moment that it kind of included other communities and other actors and different disciplines, then different issues came out and different motivations for open science came out as well. And we have seen that very, very clearly when we try to organize consultation at the international level to understand what open science means to different people, to different regions, to different actors, and how can you organize open science concepts, ideas, values, and norms at the international level. But very clearly and very quickly, we realize that, yes, we talk about return on investment. The results of publicly funded research should be publicly available. But very quickly, it became much more than that. And actually, what we have as the basic driver at the international level is the fact that open science really can be a tool to bridge the gaps in science, technology, innovations between countries and within countries. And these gaps in STI are really at the basis of a lot of inequalities that we see in the world today. So tackling those issues of inequities and inequalities in terms of access to science, in terms of participation to science, in terms of benefits from science, have become very, very important. So open science is actually now embedded in this context of a kind of a need, as we said, for a cultural shift towards science that is more equitable, that is more accessible, more open, not only to scientists, but also to the society more broadly. So let me just very quickly share my screen. I do have a few slides to share. Here we go. So yes, indeed, we really do see now open science in a context of a need for a change in the scientific culture, from competition to collaboration, as Thanos was mentioning before, from looking at science as a product, as an output, to looking at science as a process, and then opening up the different parts of that process. And then from looking at science as science for the elites, for the selected few, to science for all in the context of science as a global public good, which was also mentioned before. So when we start looking in this cultural shift and a change, and when we start looking at science at the global level, then of course there is the need to have an international policy framework on open science. And our member states, the member states of UNESCO, 193 of them, recognized that need in 2019. We had this consultative process to understand what is open science on international level, what are the different visions and what is the shared vision for open science, the definition, values, and principles, to basically democratize the entire scientific process, increase access to scientific information, provide innovative solutions, and bridge, as I said, the gaps between countries and within countries in terms of science, technology, innovation, and also fulfill the human right to science. And I think all of that came very, very strongly and became very visible during the COVID-19 crisis. So in 2021, the 193 member states of UNESCO did adopt the UNESCO recommendation on open science, which indeed provides a shared definition of open science, the different pillars of open science, broadening it up from open access, as Joy was saying before, and then defining shared values and principles that actually would need to guide open science practices across the world, across the disciplines, across the different actors. I think another thing that came out very strongly from this process of defining an international policy framework is that there are so many actors that are involved and that there are so many partners that need to be involved as we transition towards open science. But really, as I was saying before, open science is seen and it is now defined in the recommendation as all of these different movements that open scientific collaborations and increase sharing of information, that make multilingual scientific knowledge openly available, accessible, and reusable for all, but also that opens the processes of scientific knowledge creation, evaluation, and communication to societal actors beyond the traditional scientific community. So really a broad view of an open science system that we would need moving forward to indeed solve some of the global issues and local issues as well. Looking into different pillars of open science, there is of course open access to data, open access to scientific publications, but also open science infrastructures and this opening towards society through citizen participatory science, scientific volunteering, and a dialogue between different knowledge systems. So these are the things that have come out very strongly as important components of open science in different parts of the world. In terms of values, we have quality and integrity, collective benefits, equity and fairness, diversity and inclusiveness. So really putting science in terms of global public good. Now, as we move towards, implementation of open science practices, this need of cultural shift for open science, of course, policies are important because in a way they make open science required, but policies alone cannot make it happen. You do need infrastructures in place to make it possible, to make it easy. You need capacity building, you need capacities, people need to understand what open science is, and that again, on different levels and among the different actors. You need incentives, as it was also mentioned before, and you also need funding and monitoring, including monitoring of the different unintended consequences, as we were saying before, including the APCs and some of the other unintended consequences. So again, it is a system change. So for the system change, there need to be all kinds of different parts in place. And what we have been doing within UNESCO, we have basically put together different working groups who help us work precisely on these different elements, on policies, infrastructures, funding and incentives, capacities, and on monitoring, trying to understand and unpack a little bit, what does that actually mean? What are the different cases that we have across the world? What are the different challenges? What are the different opportunities? And through that work of the working groups, and I know that many of you are part of the working group, so I really do thank you for your time. We've been producing this toolkit that has some guides, checklists, fact sheets, and some indexes. And one of the guides is precisely on developing policies for open science and what are some of the criteria and key factors to take into account. But I would also like to flag here the checklist for open access publishers on implementing the recommendation on open science of UNESCO that we've produced together with OASPA, and that has been very, very successful and has been downloaded many times from our website. And it's probably one of the most downloaded parts of the toolkit that we have there today. So if you haven't seen it yet, please scan the QR code or go on our website and check the checklist. Now, going a little bit into what is in this guide for developing policies for open science, I think what the group wanted to do is really on a higher level say, okay, how is an open science policy different from other policies? Why is it a useful tool at the national or at an institutional level? Who should be involved and what are some of the key factors to take into account while developing open science policy? So in terms of the reasons why having an open science policy, it is because it builds long-term stability, commitment, clarity. It really engages actors and stakeholders and can be used to remove legal and structural barriers for open science in particular. There are different actors, of course, that need to be involved, as Joy was saying also. One thing that we have seen also is that there are different ways of developing open science policy system or ecosystem, if you wish, because there are countries and there are actors that prefer working on open access policy separately from open data policy, and then separately from open engagement policy, and so on and so forth. There are countries that prefer having one overarching open science policy that would include these different elements. There are countries that prefer revisiting their science, technology, innovation policies and including open science considerations, values, and principles into that STI policy that exists at the national level. There are countries that prefer to do action plans or roadmaps, and anything that actually can promote open science and bring together the different stakeholders can work, because really there is a huge diversity in terms of how science systems work in different countries, and there needs to be some flexibility also in terms of development of open science policies. So some of the key factors to consider while developing a policy for open science is, of course, it has to be open science needs to be mainstreamed into existing science policies and into existing science systems. The idea ultimately is not to have closed science and open science as two separate tracks. The idea is that ultimately all science would become open science by default. So there needs to also be alignment with other existing policies, which are also important for open science, whether it's higher education policies or trade policies. It can be all the different environmental policies, every single policy that actually also depends on science as, of course, source of knowledge for implementation. There has to be alignment with those policies as well. Clarity, comprehensiveness. I will. Comprehensiveness, equity, and of course, ways of enforcing the policy, commitment to resourcing and monitoring evaluation of these policies. So I'm going to stop here, invite you again to have a look at our website and join these working groups. They're all open working groups. You can join them. We produce all of these different materials, and we use those working groups also to kind of discuss these different issues among different actors and among different regions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Anna. I think the work that the working groups are doing is fantastic. And I think that's one of the ways we can obviously have a cohesive, coherent way of developing and sharing these best practices. We're really encouraging colleagues and delegates who are in this conference to look to join those working groups. So those will be very, very instrumental documents. Maybe very quickly inviting the next speaker as we're out of time. Can I invite Shinichi, Akaike from Japan, the Secretariat of Science, Technology, Innovation Policy Cabinet Office. Shinichi?
Yes, thank you very much. I'll share my slides. Okay, so, okay. It's okay? Okay, so.
Yeah, we can see them.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me inviting me for these things, panel. So I'm Shinichi Akaike, Director for Director EBPM Integrated Strategy. I'm in charge of open science and evidence-based policy. So let's just I'll share again. Sorry. Okay. So first of all, I will explain our policy. So our STI policy is based on science and technology basic plan. It is enacted every 5 years. So the main topics concept of the basic plan is Society 5.0. Society 5.0 is the concept. So combining fusion of cyber and physical, and to change the society. For example, so data-driven energy management and other robotics and so on. And we host G7 summit this year. So we share G7 countries share the concepts of open science. So we formulated the so leaders communique in Hiroshima. The one of the important topics of open science. And the G7 countries will promote open science by equitably disseminating scientific knowledge, public-funded research outputs, including research data, and scholarly publications following fair principles. This will enable researchers and people to benefit from and contribute to creating knowledge, innovation, and solutions to global challenges, and so on. And we also enacted the Hiroshima, Science and Technology Ministers Communique in Sendai. And so this communique includes detailed contents to promote open science. For example, the G7 will collaborate in expanding open science. And so the G7 also supports immediate open and public access to government-funded scholarly publications and scientific data, and promoting interoperability and sustainability of infrastructure for each outputs. And we and so on. And the incentives and so evaluation, incentives and assessment for promoting open science is also very important. And especially European countries are interested in evaluation and assessment issues. Here is our open access policy for to promote immediate open access to publicly funded scholarly publications and scientific data, underlining the publication for new applications and starting applications. So we decided to starting point of open access fiscal year 2025, and we think the clear message is important to promote open access. So we are planning some policy packages. For example, to support the enhancing ability to negotiate with academic publishers and enhance the Research DX platform for managing and utilizing research outputs, enhance and ability of researchers and communities to disseminate their research outputs, and also evaluation and assessment incentive and so on. So we will introduce mainly green open access using platform for research outputs. For example, we establish platform for academic articles and preprints and research data and so on. So we also we already constructed the system for sharing and opening our research outcomes. For example, NII Research Data Cloud manages research data and academic articles. So this system is linked with 800 institutional repository of universities and other academic repositories. And so the NII Research Data Cloud has collaboration with European Open Science Cloud, and we will improve interoperability and sustainability to share our data. And we also have the suggestive platform, including Japanese academic societies and preprint server and other repositories for background data for Japanese society. Japanese Academic Society. So we will share the articles and data to the public. So here is newly developed our preprint server. So it is quite a new platform for preprint. So it is just only 1% of Japanese users, but we will connect with the global preprint server, such as Archive and other famous preprint server, and we will try to share our preprint to the global academic community, and we will formulate at an early date national open access policy to national open access policy, and we will introduce immediate open access to public funded scholarly publications and scientific data and aligning the publications for new applications starting fiscal year 2055 of competitive research funds. So it is very challenging, but we will, as I said, so we think clear message to open access is very important. Thank you very much for thank you very much for your consideration. Okay.
Thank you very much, Shinichi, for the Japanese perspective, starting with the G7 commitment towards open science and the efforts that Japan is carrying through, including on developing the necessary platforms for ensuring that data and other research outputs are shared. And of course, on your future plans going forward to have that momentum. So really, I'm sure the audience here appreciate that. Can I now very quickly invite the Malaysian Open Science Alliance through Nurzatil, Jalaluddin, to also take the floor and share their experiences in Malaysia. I'll give you your 10 minutes, but be very at the very edge of the presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind introduction. So today I'll take just 10 minutes, hopefully, to just share with you the experience that we have in Malaysia when we started with Malaysia Open Science Platform and also the policy development regarding the open science in our country. So a very quick introduction to Open Science MOSP initiative. Actually, the initiative is led by the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation, MOSTI. We started it back in 2019 and we have successfully launched our MOSP platform, the portal, in May 2023. So the objective of this MOSP is to gather and consolidate research data in Malaysia onto a platform according to the FAIR principle. So the primary driver towards having this MOSP initiative is because of the great wealth of research data that is produced by the researchers in Malaysia. So speaking about the numbers, it's a huge numbers considering that Malaysia is a small country. And in addition to that, the idea of having this open science policy in Malaysia is primarily to streamline data sharing policies among the research performing institutions. And also there are also many other reasons. And of course, the policy is so important as providing the mandate for open science implementation, and to introduce and mandate the implementation of research data management plan for the research institutes as well. So another interesting point I would like to share here as well is the concept of Malaysia Open Science Alliance. So the way of MOSP is done is pretty much we are grouping together those who have interest in open science. So there are several ministries, especially those that are doing hardcore research, okay, and also research universities that's under the Malaysia Research University Network. So all of these ministries, universities, and also government research institutes, we work together, yeah, under one roof, and what we call ourselves as the Malaysia Open Science Alliance. So the alliance concept is used as a model to push this open science agenda forward in Malaysia. So why we feel that we need to have guidelines on open science in Malaysia. So first of all is that when we started with MOSP, actually we did, the first thing we did actually is to do a landscape study on open science in Malaysia. So when we did that landscape study on open science in Malaysia, we found that the concept of research data sharing is quite new to the research communities in our country. So unlike open access, which is pretty much quite common among the researchers, open science is quite new to us. So rather than taking the approach of introducing a policy per se at the national level, so the Malaysia Open Science Alliance, we believe that is more practical to introduce the guidelines on open science policy in Malaysia. So just to serve as a template for these local institutions to guide them to develop institutional policies related to the data sharing and also open science in particular. So the method of we doing things when we try to formulate these national guidelines on open science is, first of all, we do a benchmarking with Malaysia and also other selected countries and also other open science initiatives. So we engage a lot with CODATA, for example, as well as ANDS from Australia. We also did a lot of interviews and surveys with the relevant stakeholders. So we spoke to the librarians, the future data stewards, the top management of the research universities, even to the industry and also the government institute as well. And we also did a number of consultations and workshops to get their insights and also their buy-ins on these guidelines on open science. So from those inputs and sharing, so we managed to distill all this information under 6 subtopics that's pretty much is listed in this slide. So moving forward, actually, in terms of the, after having these open science guidelines in Malaysia, the next thing to do is really much is the challenges to understand the challenges to develop the open science policy itself. So when we did the landscape studies on open science, we feel that it's very important, first of all, in a country like Malaysia, where there are many ministries overseeing every scope of their own purview, there need to be a good understanding on what are the policy vacuums and ambiguities in the existing STI landscape in Malaysia. Second thing is to understand the readiness level of funding body policy and research performing organization for open science in Malaysia. So for example, in Malaysia, we have 2 main ministries who are pretty much the research funders, actually. So first is the Ministry of Science and Technology. Second one is the Ministry of Higher Education. So like Ministry of Higher Education, for example, they started already to give a mandate saying that researchers who apply for the certain grants, they need to spell out what is their plan for data sharing. So we are now in the midst of talking to them to pretty much get their buy-ins to get them put in a clause to incentivize data sharing policy, data sharing among the researchers, for example. And thirdly, the challenges will be the specific issues that are unique to open science in Malaysia. Well, I mean, the previous presenters have spoke about IP, legal issues, confidentiality. Those are the similar patterns or concerns that we see also among the researchers in Malaysia. So pretty much the next thing to do is strategies to overcome the obstacles. We see the usefulness of using the alliance as a model to ensure inclusive participation among the multiple stakeholders in the country. So when we started OASP, we have quite a number of agencies or ministries in the alliance, and we see that the memberships in this alliance will expand from time to time later on. In terms of the funder organizations, we'll continue negotiations with research funders to get their buy-ins. It's very important actually to have their buy-ins and to have them to be committed in open science, get them to include important clauses in their policies relate to promote or incentivize open science practices for the researchers itself. And of course, for the research performing institutions, such as universities, for example, is to get them to understand that it's very important to have institutional policies on open science. So at the moment, we have two universities, University Malaya and also University Science Malaysia, who already have the open science policy at their own institution. But some of the other universities are still drafting or formalizing their open science policy. So this is a good sign for Malaysia, especially when we talk about, supporting towards nurturing an open science ecosystem in the country. And of course, it's also very important, not just talking about just having policy. We need to have the strong will from top management to support open science. And that talks actually, of course, we talk about the incentives for the researchers for the TESANs. Sorry. So as a road ahead, I think open science agenda needs to be more visible in the relevant national policies, especially in STI policy. At the moment, we don't have an open science policy yet, but we hope to have that one, hopefully by earliest is actually next year. Second is to develop and sustain financial support for MOSP to maintain and expand, build competence for human capital. That is very important to achieve towards the open science policy goals. And of course, finally, it's about the governance, the right positioning of the MOSP itself in the government institutional framework. So I think that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Nurzatil. Sorry to rush you, but a very detailed presentation with a lot of things that others can learn off of. I think indeed this is the sentiment of this panel, beyond which we want to make sure that we have a mechanism for sharing these experiences. So hopefully going forward in the next conferences, including the iteration of this one, it could be that we can have maybe a more detailed interaction with more time. But cognizant of the time, I think we've done very well. We are over 3 minutes. We haven't had discussions, but I can see there are 1 or 2 questions in the Q&A, particularly one question that was asking if any of the panelists can maybe comment on the issue of research integrity or robust research practices and open science. And indeed, what is the connection regarding policies and making sure that there is obviously interventions for responsible research practices. Does anybody in the panel have a view on the connection or on the linkages between research integrity and open science, notwithstanding that sharing data is the pinnacle of ensuring integrity in science? Anna, maybe you can take that one.
I can start, but I'm sure also we can hear from the other panelists as well. there is definitely a link between the two. There is no question about it. And as I was saying before, it's very important for open science policies that are being developed to be in alignment with other existing relevant policies, including those that, for example, look into responsible science or research integrity, trustworthy science. There are all kinds of different ways of calling these types of policies. So yes, and we have actually in the in our guide, among the key factors, also said that you do need to look into research integrity while you're developing your open science policy. So definitely there is a connection there between open science and research integrity.
Thank you for that, Anna. Any of our panelists wants to offer a viewpoint on research integrity and open science and policy?
No, Anna has pretty much covered it.
Yes.
Because that is also one of the main aspects, the main reasons why the regional parliaments insisted on getting involved in this process. So they know that one of the things that will be very critical is the integrity of research and what aspects have been put in place to protect the users of research and also the recipients of research. Fortunately for us, in STI policies, that is already covered. So including the open science policy within the open science policy within the STI policy, it becomes more of a buffer zone. But also, we also need to, part of the activities we do in creating the awareness on research integrity is also making researchers understand that even with the rise of open science and the various open infrastructural support systems like preprint repositories, these make an open peer review, these make the whole process of research integrity much more it's less questionable, because right now you can see the process of peer review, you can see the comments. Fortunately, there are even publishers who are adopting the process of showing the whole process of the peer review, which before was a bit on the fence. So we are in a situation whereby even the infrastructural the open science infrastructural capacities that are coming up are aiding in mitigating this issue of research integrity. And this is why when we are having these conversations on open science, it is important to share with the various stakeholders how the various facets support the integrity of research.
Thank you, colleagues. Very, very quick one. I think there's a very interesting question on the Q&A. It goes, do you believe the move to open science is now on the back burner, is on the backtrack, given that there is also a similar trend with remote working policies in some companies? I think that's the question there. Do you believe we are still having the momentum? Is the momentum still there with open science, or is now slowly getting to the back burner?
But it depends on which part of the world. The fact that on our side, we have two parliaments pushing for it. And I believe, if I'm not wrong, the SADC region, that is the Southern African Development Corporation, if I'm not, is that correct, Tshiamo? Southern African Development Community. Yeah, which makes up the South, part of Eastern and Southern Africa is also pushing for this. It's definitely not going in the back burner. As I said, on our side, we are fortunate because we have policy actors pushing for it. That's why they need to have a better understanding on how it's going to support them. But I think the question for all of us should be, how do we make it multi-sectoral? Because right now, it's still focusing heavily on STI and higher education. Science is for society. And so far, our society has been around STI and higher education. We should be asking ourselves, when we are getting involved in open science, even especially for the infrastructural solutions, to what degree can they cross over to industry? It would be nice to have a conversation where we have ministers of trade or stakeholders from economics and trade involved in these conversations as well. Yeah.
Indeed, those are very important points. Before the organizers remind us of the time, maybe I could stop it there. There's vigorous inputs on the chat. So I implore colleagues to keep on providing inputs on the chat so that we can have a collective inputs on this particular session. What is left, I didn't introduce myself. I left it till the end on purpose so that I do not eat into the time of my distinguished panelists. My name is Tshiamo. I'm the director for the African Open Science Platform. We're very excited in the continent to be developing a platform to provide us with a mechanism to coordinate our efforts around open science. And indeed, the policy development is a key issue for us. There are very few countries in the continent with a ratified set of policies, and we believe that policies overarch all the necessary actions that needs to happen. We also believe that through open science, we can foster collaborations in the continent, and indeed, we also need to address infrastructural issues. Colleagues, you all just returned from China, where we attended the Open Science Platform, Open Science Clouds Symposium, towards obviously the conversation around the global open science cloud. And I think this is very critical. We need to start maybe looking at low-hanging fruits of how we can start collaborating on those areas, including SDGs that allow us to engage and push for open science. So I think at this point, I'll hand over to the organizers and thank all my panelists. And I assure the delegates in this conference that the next conference, we will hope to have more time so that we can indulge and take stock of where we have been for the next year, so to say, and make sure that we have a barometer of progress, and we keep on infusing and growing this treasure trove of experiences around open science policies to be able to share this. Thank you very much.